I'm the president of Liftport Group. And a couple of weeks ago, we started this series live on YouTube. And then we're going to take this series and cut it into parts and turn it into a podcast. So let me give you a little bit of background. We're going to do something a little bit different today. As some of y'all know, Liftport, our team, we have a nearly 20-year history in working in big ideas in space. We started as a part of the NASA Institute for Advanced Concepts research team. I was the second guy on that team. Over time, from 2001, 2, and 3, we worked under the NASA umbrella. That was pre-Liftport. 2003, 4, 5, 6, and 7, we created Liftport to focus on the extraordinarily strong strings you need for the Earth's space elevator. And we also worked on robotics. And, we have examples of that stuff kind of over on our shelf here. In 2007, the company closed. It was kind of a result of the economic crisis. And then fast forward in 2017, we restarted with the goal to focus on a lunar elevator, an elevator that we could build on the moon. And that's been our primary focus really for more than a decade, but we restarted the company in 2017. We were much smaller. During the first version, we were 14 people. Our current size is 5. But along the way, COVID happened. So during COVID, a lot of our funding evaporated. And so we had to make some really drastic pivots to stay in business. And what we wound up doing was a lot of online conferences. We hosted 27 online conferences, one hybrid recently, where it was partly online, partly in person, mostly. And that pivot was necessary for us to stay in business. We hosted around 350 guests. We have, 400 or 500 hours worth of content posted to YouTube. More's coming every day. And then we find ourselves in this new pivot as the world is once again changing. Instead of doing conferences as a service, which we are still doing, but less frequently, we've recently shifted to, we took a look at what we were good at, and that was having interesting people to talk about this thing that we love, space development. And so this is only our 5th program. We've got some great guests already, and we've got some other great guests on their way. So we've had Kobina Hughes, as an attorney that's interested in space. We've had Laura Forsick as an analyst. We've had the executive director of the Mars Society, James Burke, and Dr. Andrew Aldrin, his name is probably familiar to y'all, the last name, who's a professor at Embry-Riddle and has literally been in the space business since he was 7 years old with his father. So those are the guests that we've had so far. We're really happy with them, and we're putting the podcast together now. You can find all of that on our YouTube channel, youtube.com/Liftport. And as we go forward, we've got the chief historian of NASA, and who became the curator at the Smithsonian, Dr. Roger Lanius, the vice president of Redwire, Rich Bowling. We've got the founder of the Mars Society, Dr. Robert Zubrin, on his way. So we have some really great guests already, and we have some more coming up. And the point of this podcast, the point of this video series, is to expand everyone's knowledge on the money, the finance, the capitalization of space. It's a half a trillion dollar industry already. There are very few organizations paying attention to it. Even diehard fans are not really aware of the scope, the depth, and the width of this industry. And so we're trying to put a spotlight on that, with the idea that we're going to be hosting 2 of these shows every week, Mondays and Wednesdays, at the same time. And then culminating in a few months with a conference, DareGreatly.space. We're going to host that conference every quarter. So we're really dedicating ourselves to the topic of money and space. We think it's an underappreciated topic, and frankly, from the old movie, The Right Stuff, with no bucks, you've got no Buck Rogers. We think that the capitalization of space is really the key to making all of our dreams of space come true. So with that, that's the guiding star that we use to build our shows and build our conferences. We've got some exciting news coming up. I'm not gonna share it just yet, but we have a new sponsor coming on that's going to be developing a whole new set of shows. So we're really excited about that. And as we go forward, this conferences as a service is evolving into a podcast as a service business line. And all of that is to say we're really committed to getting back to building lunar infrastructure. And so with the success of these services, podcasts and conferences, we should get back to building the actual lunar infrastructure at the beginning of next year. So I'm really happy about the changes that are happening here. And with that, let's get into tonight's program. As I've said, we have had some really interesting guests, and that will be the core of our ongoing programming. But I want to point out when there's really significant news or information, we're gonna modify our plans a little bit to take advantage of that. And that happened this week. I'm going to do some screen sharing. I'm going to mostly just be hidden in the corner here. And the rest of this evening is going to be focused on a brand new report from Euroconsult called Prospects for Space Exploration, an economic and strategic assessment of the space exploration sector. And we're going to try and break this down in a way that is enlightening and maybe brings up some questions, because I certainly had some questions when I was reading this document. And so with that, I'm going to shift to the feed. And to answer some of the comments in the chat, yeah, it's live right now. We are recording it. We are live streaming it to YouTube. Appreciate the comments, folks. Appreciate that. Yeah, let me, and Doug, I'm going to comment about cislunar iconosphere in a minute. So let's kind of dig into this. But that's an important distinction that the authors of the document actually, I think, don't make a very good case for. So we're going to talk about that in just a minute. So let me get over to the document. Oh, and by the way, if y'all are space nerds enough to want to know the policies that are shaping the space industry, early in our YouTube channel, maybe 2 years ago, we spent a lot of time on that. Now, that information's slightly out of date, but it does give you some interesting historic context. So where are we starting? We're starting with Euroconsult itself. And I'll be posting links here for some of this stuff. So Euroconsult, despite its name, is not exclusively a Eurocentric community. They have people spread out in several different places. I think Sydney, Washington D.C., Montreal, and all over Europe. So while Euro is in their name, they are definitely not restricted to their one region. They have been in the space sector as analysts for a really long time. So I've come to trust their information. And just Monday, they released this report. We're going to go through it. I mean, we're not going to go through all of it. I want to point out that this is the free extract version. We're going to talk about that in a moment. But the report itself, let me just grab this link. So that's going to go out there. And then my team will distribute it both to the internal chat and to the YouTube channel. So I'll try and share this stuff as best I can. As I say, I've been impressed with Euroconsult for a long time. If memory serves, they're pretty connected to International Space University, which is my alma mater. So I'm not saying that I trust them because of the bias. I'm saying that they hire smart people and they're pretty good at their job. But what's their job? One of the things they do is they build reports, market intelligence, and they have a whole set of reports that they update on a regular basis. I have not bought one of their reports at $5,000 or $7,000 or $15,000 for the reports. I do not buy their reports, and yet still a fan with the stuff that they make available and free. I'm going to point out something else. This is now their third edition. I think that's really important. They issue this report every other year. I don't have the other two, but I did find some stuff. It's probably stolen or plagiarized, so I want to point that out. But I think it is their stuff that's just been reposted to folks. So their second edition, which I'm going to show first. I'm sorry, I'm out of order. Yeah, I'm out of order. This is the one that I think is maybe stolen. It's being presented as a markets and research, a research and markets.com offering. Although when I went to their site, it was no longer available. So I have a strong hunch that this has been plagiarized. But assuming that it is in fact from the source of Euroconsult, they're saying that in 2017, total space exploration budget was $14.6 billion. I think that's probably in the right range. Again, I'm pretty confident that this is that this source is still from Euroconsult. So keep that number in mind: 14.6 billion for space exploration. And then fast forward a year, and this is verified to be from Euroconsult. 2 years later, that number totaled 20 billion in 2019. So that's a pretty big jump in just those 2 years. $6 billion jump in just those 2 years, and now it's even larger. So we're going to come to that in a moment. So just keep those numbers in mind. 14.6, so let's say that's 15 billion and 20 billion. And that's over a 6-year jump. So these other reports are interesting. Again, disclaimer on the second one, because I do think it was I do think it's been plagiarized. But I think the source is still good. So again, I'm posting that to the channels. I want to dig into the title, because if you get this part wrong, the rest of this is not going to make sense. This is the prospects for space exploration. And frankly, when I read this at first, I had so many red flags and alarms going off when I was reading it. But it's not what I thought it was. I thought it was an assessment of the sector in the first place, and it's not. It's really focused on exploration. In many cases, we're still doing a lot of exploration, but in many cases, we have gone beyond exploration. And it's the beyond exploration part that I've normally been paying attention to. So I think it's actually really useful that this report is out there. Somehow I had missed it before. And so I'm actually learning stuff for the first time just myself. And that's good. I like that. So I'm gonna read this stuff. I'm gonna do what I kind of loathe in PowerPoint presentations. But again, this is going to become a podcast. So I want to make sure that the folks listening know what's being shown on the screen. So the scope. Prospects for Space Exploration provides an economic and strategic assessment of the space exploration sector. It includes an analysis and benchmark of government and commercial space exploration programs worldwide. The report identifies existing and upcoming new entrants in space exploration, as well as global trends to space exploration. And it analyzes collaborative undertakings for exploration, including both international space agency partnerships as well as public-private partnerships. All right, so that's a mouthful, and we're going to kind of take these a bit at a time. But the things to really pay attention to is this is all government-led. And my hunch is, and I don't have verification, so I want to be clear about what I know and what I'm guessing. My hunch is that they're using governmental information as a verifiable data source, right? You know, I could say, oh, we're building, a $600 million elevator on the moon. That's cool. That could be any company can say that. I know a lot of companies just make declarations. They're not backed up by anything. And so I believe that they are using governmental data as verifiable data sources. And I think that's super important. And that scopes this conversation very carefully. So a government can do the things that it wants to do, and then it might pay private organizations to be partners and allies. Because what this doesn't do is it doesn't account for the development of Starship. It only briefly accounts for minor dollars associated to Slingshot, for example, right? It only has a few dollars from SBIRs and STTRs and some other small dollar grants, but yet it's funded at $30 million, $50 million as an organization. Well, those maybe $500,000 million for government research projects, those are accounted for in this report, but the 30 to 50 million of unknown private capital, that's not accounted for in this report. So it's really important to understand like what this says and what it knows and what it doesn't know. Then we're going to go a little further. This report contains the following information. And they say this over and over and over again, by the way. Government funding in space exploration of leading space agencies and 2 periods of reference are considered: 2012 to 2021 for historic trends and 2022 to 2031 for forecasting. I think that actually makes a lot of sense. That information is very easily obtained from historic trends, and it makes it pretty succinct for forecasting. As anybody who knows me and the work that we've done at Liftport, and especially over the last 2 years with our media company, our media brand, Better Futures, I tend to look a little further out to 2035. There's not any really good reason for that other than, I think a nice round number of 2035 makes it a little easier to digest. And the last thing I want to point out when we talk about scope here is that, when we talk about government direct research in exploration and their partnerships with commercial companies, this does not evaluate in any way independent organizations that have no affiliation with the government. They're just going out and doing things. So this doesn't account for OneWeb or the Kuiper satellite network or Starlink, because those are direct those are direct private company efforts. And it doesn't include stuff like Uber and Lyft. They're using satellite data for their basic business model. I have never seen a report that actually encompasses the full width of the space sector. And when we talked to the Bureau of Economic Analysis in Washington, D.C. last year, they literally shrugged their shoulders and said that they don't think that data is possible. So I was pretty disappointed with that. So moving on with the report, there's an awful lot of missions being launched between 2022 and 2031. Those are available in the report. The report focuses on key governmental and commercial players. Knowing the players, I think, is super important. And the report concentrates on programs in LEO, orbital, and beyond LEO, excluding suborbital activities like space tourism. So the whole point-to-point market, the stuff that Sierra and Virgin are aiming for, Blue to a lesser extent, that's not covered in here, right? They're really driving home the point that this is about exploration and not commercialization. And finally, this report goes into 6 broad topics. I'm actually a little surprised by some of these, but in order, they are orbital infrastructure, transportation, Mars, Moon, other deep space exploration, and astronomy like astrophysics and heliophysics. It wasn't until I read that last piece that I'm like, oh, light bulbs go off. This is a report on exploration. So yeah, astronomy and deep space exploration should be in there. Yeah, I know that sounds really goofy, but it did take me a minute to get the light bulb to come off here. I want to point out that their price tag is $5,000 for this report, and that's not the kind of money that Liftport spends on this kind of work. Believe me, we have better things we can do than a €5,000 report. But I would recommend. I'm not going to make a recommendation. I'm just going to acknowledge that. if we were the kind of company that had those kind of resources, this is one of the things that we would do. And I really want to stress that. Like if we were not resource constrained, this is one of those things that we would do, because I would love to see this database of historic data and forecasts for the next 10 years. And I would like to see the analysis that they have done on the 11 governmental space programs. Now, I think I know a lot in this field. I spend an awful lot of time reviewing and evaluating, but I don't think that I know it all. And having a succinct report, I think, would be pretty helpful. So that's as much of a plug as you're going to get from me. If we weren't resource constrained, I would buy it. We are resource constrained, so I will not buy it. And I'm going to point out, they talk about 11 government space programs. We're going to go into that a little bit more, but I want to just plant a seed in the back of your heads that when space first happened, Gagarin making his historic flight in 61, we've had 50-ish years of flight, but well, I said 50. Yeah, okay, 60. We've been doing this for a long time, but in the earliest days, there were just two organizations, the U.S. versus USSR. There were only two budgets, and ultimately there was only one goal: go to the moon. That was a space race, and now we're talking about thousands of budgets and dozens, maybe hundreds of specific goals. And so to see the analysis of these 11 space programs, I think that would be really interesting, from a non-biased, presumably non-biased perspective. I think if you're going to spend 7,500 or 15,000 euros, getting a dedicated presentation by the Euroconsult experts, I think that's should be part of the service. So I like that. So let's talk about this. So this is what the report gets into. Lots of topics, and I find it interesting. They spend one page on commercial organizations, and then they spend one page on private investment, and then they spend one page on international mission roadmaps, and then they spend one page on prospects for moon exploration, right? So what this is saying, if you could read this, if you could just review the table of contents the way that I'm doing, is that they've got to put a lot of key information on every single page to justify a price tag like this. But they're not putting, deep analysis. They're presenting key information, and then you can kind of decide what to do with it. Their whole section on moon exploration, which is, of course, the area I'm the most interested in, that's only 10 pages. It's 9 pages. So I think that should tell you what this report's about, right? It's a little bit of a lot of things, and I think that's kind of the point of organizations like this, right? That they scan the field for interesting tidbits, and then in as professional and concise a way as they can, then they showcase it. I would love to see more of this moon exploration program. It's not in this report. I know that, because we have a lot of Mars fans in our community, they would like to know what's there, and that's 5 pages of information on Mars. So is it enough? I mean, this whole document is more than 150 pages long. I think their analysis, their profiles of government space programs, to me, that might be the most interesting. That's 30 pages, maybe more, and probably tells a really important story. But interestingly to me, they did not put some really important stuff in here. There's no analysis of Luxembourg, considering that they're putting $400 million into resource extraction in space. I think that's a really important element that's apparently missed in this document. It doesn't specifically call out the UK, and the UK is rapidly building spaceports. If you were to look at a map, and we'll on a different day, we're going to go through some of the reports. I think it's from Bryce that outlines how many spaceports are being built. And the UK is making a giant commitment to spaceports. Look at the landmass of the United States and look at the landmass of the UK. They have as many or more spaceports as the United States. I think that's really significant, and somebody should be paying attention to that. Just in the last few weeks, I learned that Mongolia is really interested in Mars and has taken it on as a national program. Why? Why is Mongolia doing this? Well, for some of the same reasons that the United States and Russia did in the earliest days, national prestige. But this report's looking at United States, China, European Space Agency, Japan, Russia, other European programs, Canada, India, United Arab Emirates, South Korea, and Australia. So they're looking at these 11, and there are some commonalities I would guess are in there. But each of these 11 are at different stages and what they're trying to accomplish. Mongolia is trying to upskill their nation in the same way that United Arab Emirates is trying to upskill their nation. They've picked an ambitious target. In this case, both UAE and Mongolia are going towards Mars. They've picked an ambitious timescale. They have vastly different budgets, but their goal of increasing the skills and capacities of their national citizenry is the same. I think that's really interesting. South Africa just this week announced that it was looking for a CEO to run their space agency. I find that kind of amazing. I learned that it was it's a private entity. It's a private company that manages their space agency. That was fascinating. I'm not really sure how that works, but it was pretty interesting. And then on the horizon, you've got Uganda that's investigating very seriously what they're going to do as a national space program. So there are more than 50, I think it's close to 60, but I don't think it's reached it. There are more than 50 to 60 national space agencies in the world. And so, yeah, I understand why you would focus on these 11 in this report, because they do make up the bulk of the space exploration budget. But the understanding the reasons why there are 50 or 60 space agencies and what those organizations are doing would give greater context to these core 11 programs. So I just find that interesting. I mean, just like it or not, Iran is working on a orbitally capable system, and so is North Korea. So I would, to me, getting a profile of these governmental space programs is important, but what is missing, I think that's a flaw. And so, not to throw, Euroconsult under a bus or anything, but I would like to see a larger profile of these programs, because it's not just about the dollars, it's also about the will and the decisions behind those dollars. Anybody who knows me knows that I pay a lot of attention to kind of the governmental policy components of this. All right, let's get into some more of this. Again, reading from the report directly. This report analyzes collaborative undertakings for exploration, including International Space Agency partners, as well as public-private partnerships. They look at 6 big ideas: transportation, orbital infrastructure, moon exploration, Mars exploration, other deep space exploration, and astronomy, astrophysics, and heliophysics. So those are their big areas. And then they go into some definitions. Transportation is transportation vehicles designed to carry cargo and astronauts to orbital infrastructure and to planetary bodies. To note, lunar payload cargo delivery initiatives are included in the moon exploration section. So stressing that lunar cargo is included. I was really happy to see that, because I was concerned that wasn't in there. Orbital infrastructure, orbital stations, outposts, and associated human spaceflight programs in LEO and beyond LEO. Really, this means ISS, the Chinese space station, Gateway, Heavenly Palace, and the Lunar Gateway. Again, I want to stress organizations like Axiom and Orbital Reef and VAST and Orbital Assembly and Arcasys. And I mean, I think if we count them all, there's about 11 or 12 or 13 space stations being developed. Some are funded in the $500 million range, and some are scraping by with $1 or $2 million, which is enough to probably get a set of drawings, but probably not enough to build anything. So there's a bunch of different space stations being considered, but in this report, it's ISS, Heavenly Palace, and the Lunar Gateway. Moon exploration missions to the moon that consists of orbitals, flyby, lander, rovers, impactors, sample return, or ISRU, in situ resource utilization. I love seeing that. I think that's super important. Mars, same thing. Anybody who knows me knows I'm a lunatic, not a Martian, but still have friends over there, right? So exploration missions to Mars and or its moons that consist of an orbital, flyby, lander, rover, impactor, sample return, or ISRU. So basically the same thing, just a different destination. Other deep space exploration includes missions to other planets or their moons. It includes asteroids, missions that consist of the same thing: orbitals, flyby, lander, rover, impactor, sample return, and ISRU. And then finally, at first I thought this was a strange add-on, and then I realized there's actually a lot here. Astronomy, astrophysics, and heliophysics, Missions include observatories, telescopes, spacecraft, satellites, and/or probes. So this is a pretty big scope, right? And I want to point out a few things here that I think are both great and not so great. If you'd like to see how I think and some of our allies think the future of space is going to unfold, going back to the 2035 target, I refer to this as the grand architecture. You can find some of our videos in our channel about that. In short, it looks like there's 6 areas. So this report has 6 areas, and my grand architecture has 6 areas. But the first one for mine is launch and satellites. Like, we're really, really good at that. We launch, we launch something about every 3 days. Somewhere in the world, somebody launches something about every 3 days. We're getting really good at sending a lot of stuff up there. 300,000 tons every quarter or thereabouts. So we're getting good at Earth observation and communications. I would say that part is covered. So the next stage in my grand architecture is space stations and tugboats. I think those are really necessary for debris mitigation, in-space assembly and manufacturing. Then we get to building out the moon, which to me gets to extraction, lunar elevators, and finally using lunar resources to build better systems for Earth. And to me, that means space-based solar power, using lunar assets to power 40% of the global population by placing 300 space-based solar satellites over the top 300 cities of the world. And if you can do that, you can power 40% of the world with clean, green, limitless energy. So I'm looking at their 6, and I'm looking at my own list of 6 and saying, okay, there's some matchup, and then there's some stuff that doesn't match. My 6 of the grand architecture ends with lunar development. It doesn't get into Martian deep space or any of the astrophysics. One thing that I do think was kind of missed in this was, every day we're spending a lot of money in making better satellites, and it doesn't appear as if that is calculated anywhere. Satellite architecture has changed dramatically in the last just 10 years, in the last 5. And it all started 25 years ago, 20 years ago, with some folks at Cal Poly in San Diego that created the CubeSat form factor. And from there, it has transformed the whole world's space access. So it feels weird that there's not a topic on satellite exploration, of just building better satellites. But maybe that's not in their scope. I felt that was strange. Another thing that I felt was strange was the White House last year, or actually just this year, spring this year, posted a report, a national policy on in-space assembly and manufacturing. That is a big driver of U.S. policy, and therefore it's going to have influence to global policies for space, and that is all about research and development. So is research and development included, this question plus the satellites question, is research and development included in their assessment for exploration? And I think that it's not, by reading between the lines. And I think that's a pretty big error. because it doesn't feel like it fits any category. So it doesn't feel like there's any sort of R&D component, but there is a very large budget for R&D that doesn't seem to be accounted for in this report. And then this other point, they've got LEO, low Earth orbit. In the report, they call out LEO, low Earth orbit, and they write it in LEO orbit, which is redundant because orbit's used twice. And then they use beyond LEO orbit, and they call it BLEO, BLEO, which is both redundant and wrong, because the industry refers to this as cislunar econosphere, and it's been named the cislunar econosphere for a very long time. So I'm going to post the originating links for the name cislunar econosphere, coined by my friend Ken Murphy, quite a long time ago. When was that? Let me just look at that for a second. What year was that? Yeah, 2012. So a decade. I said about a decade. It's been a decade. Literally, I laughed when I saw the phrase BLEO orbit. I was like, yeah, that's a dig, but I'm going to live with it. And then finally, when it calls out lunar exploration, yes, it's talking about ISRU, but what about things like the lunar equivalent of GPS, sometimes known as LunaNet or Luna positioning system, or saline positioning. Position, navigation, and timing on the moon is essential. If you don't have it, people are going to die. I promise you, when PNT fails on the moon, somebody's going to die. So that's not counted in their lunar exploration. And there's a bunch of stuff going on. Some of that is our planned system for basically a great big cell tower in the sky. Other people are looking at different flavors of PNT, some position, navigation, timing. Some folks are looking at laser comms. That's not covered seems like a pretty giant oversight. So this is the only area in the report that I felt was like really off balance. Moving on, it says that the moon is the next priority destination for humans. I mean, I gotta say, I love that. Like, that just made me smile. I know it's true. There's dozens, if not hundreds, of planned missions to the moon. A very large percent, maybe 30 or 40% of those are funded programs, at least maybe not fully funded, but partially funded during the R&D stage. But I think that is super important. They clearly state that the ISS remains the world's largest international cooperation program and the corner of human spaceflight. Funding has been secured by the US until 2030, and other partners have also been vocal in securing it. Even recently, Russia has been making nods towards 2028. I think that's kind of a surprise considering where we were at the beginning of the year, but I'm happy about that. And then they go on to say, the report goes on to say that the Chinese space station will also play a central role in the next decade. Absolutely, I agree with that. We know that the Artemis program, again, reading from the document, with the Artemis program led by NASA and in partnership, several other nations' governments worldwide are planning robotic and crewed missions to achieve a sustainable presence on the moon as a pathway to Mars. And I think it's really important to point out, the sustainability component. That phrase sustainable is a term of art in Washington, D.C., and it has yet to be defined. That's really important. The word sustainable is in the official policy language, but everybody wiggled away from what does sustainable mean. Is sustainable, life support, and there's somebody on the surface of the moon year round, the way the ISS has operated year round for 2 decades? Or is sustainable go up a couple times a decade and just keep doing it consistently? We don't know what that means in terms of dollars or capabilities. So that ambiguity, in policy speak, they refer to it as constructive ambiguity. I do not think it's constructive. I think it harms us. And then as we're starting to close out today's program, I want to remind you how we started this, which was in the report in 2018, it was pegged that the exploration budget of the world was slightly less than $15 billion. And then fast forward, the report that came out in, that was 2018 with 2017 numbers. The report that came out in 2020 with 2019 numbers had a $5 billion increase. So in just 2 years, the number jumped to $20 billion. That 20% increase very, very quickly. And so now Euroconsult is saying, well, okay, it's going to be 31 billion 9 years from now. But it's a $25 billion budget now. So I know we only have 3 data points, but 15 billion, 20 billion, and 25 billion, 2 years, 2 years, 2 years. So I think that's pretty cool, but it does make me wonder if the trend line is real, right? A $5 billion increase every 2 years would indicate that this $31 billion number by 2031, several years from now, is out of whack. Does that mean that the appetite for exploration is diminishing? I don't think so at all. Does that mean that different players were added to the evaluation, which is why you got a $5 billion increase? Because maybe I'm making stuff up. Maybe in one of the reports it didn't include Japan. Maybe one of the reports didn't include India. And so maybe that's how you got big jumps. So I'm really perplexed by this trend line. And my hunch is, yes, okay, granted, the Mongolian research and development for space budget is probably pretty small. But nowhere in this in this report does it talk about nowhere can it talk about the Israeli program to go to the moon. And yeah, okay, it left a $200 million crater. The Indian program spent $125 million crater. But so maybe India was covered, but Israel was not. So I'm very perplexed by this number, right? I have a hunch that this 31 billion is low. I mean, especially given how far out it is. And I'm wondering how they got a $5 billion increase every 2 years for the last 6 years. So that it's very puzzling to me. This kind of ends in a strange way, and by no means this is not the end. This is the beginning of the report. There was a graphic I would like to show, and I'll try to describe it to the people that can't see it. The top investors, and this is governmental investors of 2022, they're saying the United States is about $16 billion. That makes up 65% of the full world's budget. That sounds about right. That's consistent with what I would have expected. China and ESA dropped down to 17 and 7% respectively. Now, I'm very surprised by ESA being that low. And I would doubt the numbers coming in from China because of how China runs their space program. So that feels very fuzzy, and I'd really love to see an analysis of that particular detail. Leaving Japan and India with 2% or 3% of the total budget, and then all other space nations, the nations I referred to earlier that were not in the report, is 6%. And, nations that are building space agencies, I'm not going to call them developing nations because there are some very large nations that have brand new space agencies. So it's not appropriate to call them developing nations. But nations that are developing new space capabilities, Mexico in the last 6 or 7 years, brand new space agency. Australia, brand new space agency. These organizations tend to put their resources not into exploration, but often into Earth observation and land management, right? They usually have Indonesia, for example, 30,000 islands, a giant piece of real estate if you count the islands plus the ocean interconnecting those islands. They've got issues with poaching, both on land and at sea, piracy. They've got some cities, Jakarta, absolutely 21st century standard of living, and actual, not figurative, Stone Age level tribes. So they use their space program to monitor their real estate. Are they focusing on going to the moon and Mars? Not at all. And frankly, it's not appropriate that they use their very scarce resources for those aspirational goals. It's very appropriate that they use it to make living on Earth better for their people. So that does account for why there's such a big disparity of the other nations. And so with that, I'm gonna call a close to our program tonight. I want to thank everybody who joined us here, both online and in our various channels. Doug, I appreciate your comments. I'm going to go and make an effort to follow some of your links. This is a different kind of program than we've had before. So I would love to get any feedback from y'all, whether you're coming in from LinkedIn or YouTube or whatever path you took to get to us. It would be really helpful to us to kind of hear from our community. We do have a Discord channel. I'm going to post that here. And, if you want to discuss any of these conversations more deeply. And with that, I want to always thank my team, Leah and Taylor managing the podcast component and the video component. Yusuf doing magic on our YouTube channel. Joey helping us get the word out and telling and selling our story. Because again, this is a podcast as a service business model. So if anybody's interested in that, please let me know. And finally, I want to encourage everybody to go to our DareGreatly.space conference that we'll be having. It's probably going to be in the early part of January. So please stay with us as we develop out this new channel, and I'll see you on Monday. Monday is going to be great. We've got I'm gonna not say that just yet because I need to do some confirmations. But I said in the early part of our show, Roger Lanius, Rich Bowling, Robert Zubrin, and a couple others are already scheduled. So please join us soon, and we'll see you Mondays and Wednesdays at this time. Have a great night, y'all. Appreciate it. Bye-bye.